YouTube. Hey, look. So I watched this video. It's a little bit of a longer one. We're gonna try to see how far I get into it. This is a beginning of a discussion of biracial versus black, and is there a difference on Stranger Fruit? So shout out to Stranger Fruit. Check them out for full video.
The term, Dr. Donna, reverse colorism came into play. So this annoyed the shit out of me.
Colorism is very real. It's a very real thing. Not to take away from anybody who is a light-skinned rapper, but it's definitely easier for a woman with a lighter complexion to blow up quicker than a dark-skinned woman, for sure.
Especially in the women's game. I think it's easier specifically if you're talking about hip-hop, I think it's easy simply because a lot of the women anyways build their legacy nowadays off of their sexuality in the music game. So when we can break down historically what is viewed as better looking, right?
Like that. Because like
it's a lot easier to build a career off of that.
Right? I used to get made fun of at school because I wasn't black enough. Bitches used to try to cut my hair.
So what is she? Is she mixed? Is she, what?
Like, people be thinking that like light-skinned girls don't go through colorism.
It's not colorism.
Yeah, what?
If you're light-skinned, it's not colorism.
So what is it called?
If people's picking with you, then that's like, but it's not colorism. Like colorism is discrimination against darker skin.
You're basically talking about reverse.
Well, reverse colorism then. Because they used to be like, you ain't even black for real. You're white. Go over there with the white girls. And I'm just like,
I hate this discussion because I feel like it's like the oppression Olympics. So if people of color, you're always going to feel marginalized. You're always going to feel disregarded in some sense, right? But I feel like if we're trying to have a debate here and we're trying to figure out who was more oppressed and who was more marginalized, then this is going to be an ongoing discussion. Everybody, I think, goes through their own issues in their own realm. Every ethnic group may have their own issues, pressure, whatever they stem from. I don't disavow that people of darker skin, even from their own people that are dark skinned, face some type of bullying or identity crisis amongst those people as well. The same that I could argue that I'm sure white people are going through their own issues growing up as well. So I think highlighting these things where you felt like you had some type of identity crisis isn't just subjective to one group.
like, bitch.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Like, I am black, actually.
I wouldn't say it's reverse colorism. Like, I
that
don't
thing.
think that that's a thing.
We also get, oh, you're pretty to be a black. Like, I've had white people and other.
Right.
That's racism.
Yeah,
That's
that's
racism.
racism.
That same weekend, another video came to my attention. I think that this one was a little bit more problematic. It was on a show called Black Girl Stuff. On the show called Black Girl Stuff, there was only one sort of obviously.
But do y'all think that there is a thing like reverse colorism?
A black woman who obviously she had darker skin, she had very, very short hair.
Because colorism, according to Merriam-Webster, is prejudice, discrimination, especially within a racial or ethnic group, favoring people of lighter skin over those of darker skin. So you're already a marginalized group, but you're favoring those in the group that have lighter skin. Can the reverse of that? Well, I mean, let's say if we kept it in that group, the reverse that would be favoring those of darker skin, but that can't work because outside of that group, the majority will not favor those of darker skin. So the only opposite the way that works is you flip the handle to where the people that are lighter skin are now pushing away the people of darker skin. But there is no reverse to that because that is a life that the people of darker skin live, if you're following me.
here. She got a
I don't know
Caesar.
if
She
there's
said that she had
reverse
lots of
colorism.
different kinds of hairstyles, but now she has a Caesar. It was blonde.
I feel like as a dark-skinned black woman, especially here, I had to be a little more conscious of how I show up. Even though I've had, you know, pretty much a buzz cut for like 2 years, you know what I mean? I've consistently went back and decided to wear a wig or decided to wear weaves, taking it outside of this, other corporate jobs where I did the same thing. And because of that, I did that in interviews, and I did that when I first got the job. And I realized when I
Y'all, look at this, man. This joint says black girl stuff, and you have one. I mean, what are we talking about? This is called, like, if this doesn't easily speak to the point being made here, then what else are we talking about? It's a show called Black Girl Stuff, and you have multiple light-skinned women, multiple multiracial women here. So if we're talking about representation, I think that is the argument that everyone is making in regards to colorism, because these 3 women have now beat out 3 women of darker complexion, which are not necessarily seeing the representation. People of those communities are not seeing the representation. And I mean, more often than not, it's going to be 2 people that have 2 dark-skinned black parents. It's very possible that these 3 women do not.
I was speaking to one of my lighter skinned, you know, colleagues afterwards, and we're just talking about the interview process. I had to do 10 interviews in order to get this job. And this is me working in corporate America after having not only a, you know, a bachelor's degree, an Ivy League degree as well, and a master's in business. And then I still had 10 interviews while she said she had 3. Not only that, I then realized when she told me her pay and my pay, there was a gap. And this is not just my experience, and this is not for a lack of negotiating, because I did. It's the experience of tons of darker skinned black women.
I've been in casting rooms where I did pass and benefit from looking racially ambiguous, right? I have gotten roles based on that. I can't deny that privilege. But I also have been in rooms.
Because right now, guys, let's be honest. If you had to cast somebody that was Hispanic, she could pass. If you had to cast somebody that was maybe Asian, let's talk about, you know, she could pass. And if you had to cast somebody that was black, she could pass.
Where, like you said, they tend to associate darker skin with a certain type of woman. And I think that's not fair.
No.
In a casting room one time, a casting director said to me, "Oh, you did great in your performance, but you can't play this church girl because light skin look gives us vixen vibes. And we need more of a wholesome vibe. So they chose a darker skin complexion woman just because her complexion gave more wholesome. And that's not fair."
Here's my thing. I think the conversation.
Okay, so we went from a woman talking about her inequalities she faced being a darker skinned black woman. We switched the narrative back to say, well, as a light skinned woman. Again, it's like I said, it's the oppression Olympics. What are we doing? Are we getting anywhere? Like I said, there are 3 light skinned women on a show called The Black Girl. Like, what are we talking about?
Their experience is valid. What was confusing was why it was happening then, right? So I'm going to open up the conversation with that same question. What does it actually mean to be biracial? Can you have a black parent, for example, and a white parent and be just called black? I want to start with you, Alex, on that question. We had some pretty good conversations. What do you think about that particular question? Can you be half black, half white, and just be, I'm black?
Well, in my experience, sometimes I just don't get to choose. I don't have the privilege to choose whether or not everybody is seeing me in the room as black. I spent half my life in Morgantown, West Virginia. So as wild as it may seem, I was the blackest person in the room. So even if I wanted to say like I was white and I would beg that whiteness, people were choosing for me that I was black, and that was all. Yeah, it was kind of as if the one drop rule.
I was about to say, that's how the one drop rule works. Your blood is tainting the purity of our whiteness. You cannot associate yourself with us right now. So you will fall into the colored group.
still applies. It didn't matter in a lot of places that I was in.
That is crazy. What about now? Versus your experience in West Virginia, what about like here in New York?
Versus New York, I went one time into even just, I had a dress stolen and I went to go file a police report, and I thought it was interesting because the police officers didn't even ask, they just marked me as white. And so I came out and I was like, right. And I was like, what a privilege, especially now when we're talking about how the like prison industrial complex is like a big issue and barrier in overreach and dismantling white supremacy. We can't do it with that still there. But that really showed me that if even like police officers are seeing me as white in New York, my experience in New York is much different than it was. So I really, when I'm in a room full of other Black people or people of color, I have to look to see where does my privileged voice stand? Who are the other people in the room? Is it my turn to step in or step out? Depending on where I'm at, it changes in a blink of an eye.
That's kind of crazy. That is kind of crazy. So you're like, I'm here one time and one day and I can be here the other day. Do you ever go back to West Virginia?
Yes. My spouse is also from Ohio. So I like during the holidays, I see people are literally like double take looking at me. I get a lot of comments about my hair. Yeah, they're like, what are you? And like so surprised, or like, whoa, you know, your hair is so interesting. Or people trying to touch my hair and tell me that it's like, why do you wear it curly like that? And so in an instant, but in New York where I bases live, I have so much privilege. I'm a teacher. Sometimes my students don't even see that I'm Black. I do have to sometimes tell people, or people will come to me and speak in Spanish and I'm not able to communicate. And so people are always judging and making preferences. So yeah, it still happens to this day, go back and forth. And it was a very kind of, we were talking about dissociative experience. You never know how people are gonna see you. Your amygdala is always on like fight, flight, or freeze, trying to figure out, am I safe here? Or do I actually have more power here? It could change.
That's
Crazy.
That brings me to a good point, because a lot of the conversation also is revolved around like racial ambiguity. And for people living in the United States, I think it's very, very prevalent in the United States and potentially parts of Europe, because the US in particular, because of its colonial history, there are people of color and white people kind of coexisting at once. It's not like a culture that was always, you know, like in Puerto Rico. Everyone was always from Puerto Rico, right? So the racial ambiguity piece is really interesting to me, where, and in particular myself, I always get confused for being Arabic or Persian, anything other than Puerto Rican. And so I can imagine being biracial, that can also be a little bit of like...
1 in 5 mixed Americans say they have felt pressure to identify as one race by family, friends, or society in general. 20% stat. So
a piece of confusion where you feel like you might have to choose one or the other. I think you're saying that other people choose it for you, like choose your race for you. Does anybody else have the experience of wanting to choose a race for themselves or an identity for themselves, but still has to combat that racial ambiguity piece?
That's a great question.
I have that all the time, but I'm not even biracial. Black. Well, I consider myself Black.
Yeah.
And the problem is when I show up and then people see my...
Wait, what's the difference? Wait, what's going on? Hold on. What? I'm not biracial. I'm Black. Well, I consider myself to be Black. What's going on here? What are you, an elephant? What are you talking about?
Hair and my features. They're like, oh, you're Dominican. Oh, you're this. Oh, you must be half Dominican. You must be half... I'm like, why can't I just be Black?
Yeah.
Why can't I just be African American and that just be my experience? But it's almost as if they want you to have something else. If
you just said yourself you don't even consider, like, what are you talking about?
you're not.
Right.
Nobody
And
wants you to.
Ever since I was little, I always ask, like, why can't I just be African American? Like, I'm sure I have a whole bunch of other stuff floating around in here, but I'm just not interested in figuring out what it is. And that should be okay. I should be able to rock with that without having to be like,
get your history.
Samoan? Am I Puerto Rican? Am I Dominican? Like, I don't have to guess that stuff about myself.
Yeah.
I know who I am, and I just want that, but people want you to have, like, this big story. Like, yes,
I know who I am, and I just want that, but you don't know your history, so you don't know what you are. Like, what are you talking about? Get him. Next person.
My dad was Irish, and I don't have that story.
That's so funny that you say that, Juice, because I feel like growing up, every Black person wanted to have Indian in their family. Like that shame and that type of like anti-Blackness, that inherent anti-Blackness that we possess, caused a lot of people to buy into that fact that like, oh, you have something, like they're not thinking it's bad. what you got in you, it's like, oh yeah, baby, I got Indian in me, or I got whatever in me, because it's currency. It's currency for a lot of people, especially in the hood. And I think like that is an interesting part of the conversation as well, because for you, was it that you resented people for asking that? Like, was it a bad thing that people asked you about that?
Well, I think when I was younger, when I was a kid, it confused me. Because at first, my mom always told me I was black. That's how we rolled. But everybody else around me would be like, oh, he gotta be mixed with something. Look at his hair, look at his face, look at his skin, and red undertones. He has to be mixed, yes. And I started questioning myself, like, am I, Mom? Where do I come from? And she's like, you're black. Like, why do you keep asking me that? And I'm like, well, everybody else is saying. So I think as I got older, it started becoming a negative for me, because it was like, once you ask me and I tell you what I identify as or what I consider myself, why are you still pushing this? Okay. Like a lot of times I would say, oh no, I'm just black. No, you gotta have something, because look at this hair and look at this and I'm like, now didn't I just tell y'all, you ain't, what's happening here? There's a disconnect, like why aren't you listening to me? Yeah. That's when I started getting, I guess, like it started becoming a negative for me, because I don't mind people, because I know I have like a look, so I don't mind people asking, but once they tell you, let that be what they tell you it is. Stop trying to figure out other people's like DNA. Like it's just, it's fine.
I get that.
Yeah, right. I personally hate being asked. Like, my friends know that it's a sensitive subject because I've been asked that question my entire life. What the hell are you? I'm like, what am I? I'm tired. What am I? Like, that's what I am. So, but I don't find white people asking me that. It's always my people, like, looking for a safe place to, like, open the door and allow you in. It's like, are you us? We can't tell. But now that you confirm, we'll crack the door a little bit. You're not all the way in.
Do you think that do you think white people assume?
White people know I'm not white. And I think for them, that's all that matters. It's like, oh, okay, you may not be, I don't know if you're black, you might be Palestinian, you might be this, you're not one of us, and I'm gonna treat you as such. And so they don't really, it's not a question. Like, they know, they look at me and they go, yeah, you're not one of us, clearly. And I feel like my people look at me and know I'm one of you, but how are you one of us? Explain to me. I just don't understand.
So is it a sensitive topic to like talk about your background in terms of like, so how do you identify in terms of like race and ethnicity?
Well, when people ask me, I go, my mom's Puerto Rican, my father's black. That's what you want to know, right? Like, you're not asking me anything, like, you're not asking about my experience. You're asking me what my background is. So my mom's Puerto Rican, my father's black. I don't do the half and half. In a conversation like this, it's open.
So, interestingly enough, how do you identify?
Right? So, like, if I'm out with friends and someone goes, what are you? I'm not entertaining that conversation.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Because now it's coming from a different space. And that's going to trigger me, because anyone who has had an experience like that, they step into that conversation slightly triggered already. Right? You know, whether they've been bullied, made fun of, had conversations where people have denied them
a multiracial experience. 55% of U.S. adults with a multiracial background have been subjected to slurs or jokes because of their racial background, per research. Sure. Let's speak to those who are, I guess, represent the majority then of those groups. Let's talk to the people that are Hispanic through and through, or the people that are Middle Eastern through and through, or Asian through and through, or black through and through. What the heck?
Access to spaces, it comes to the table. And so you have to be sensitive. Like, this can be a very sensitive topic. And not everybody handles it with the same kind of care that I think it needs to be handled with. Because, you know, we are all in the same room, right? We're in the same space. We are of the same people, but not everybody sees us like that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Do you want to jump in, Siobhan?
I do, actually, because I also feel that while we have to have compassion for ourselves in that mixed up place, I also think we need to have compassion for the folks who are asking us that, because I feel in black people, other black people asking me what I am, it's to determine how dangerous I am, potentially, to them. And historically, light-skinned, mixed race, biracial people, I feel, have been traitors and traders. So historically speaking, figuring out if we are cool is paramount to our survival, is how I think of that. So I don't...
Because just like I said, just like, let's say you are mixed race, one of your parents is black, one of your parents is white. Like she spoke about, let's say way back when, I could get close to you as, let's say, we're talking about slavery, all right? Or let's even dial it back 100 years, right? Where there may be some opportunity for you to pass and get ahead simply because you can pass either way. You have an opportunity to claim this or that. Like I said, if we take it back to even slavery times, but a lot of times there was some type of dilemma going on with the owner's wife, husband, etc. I might feel betrayed because I could get close to you, but at the end of the day, you have some type of opportunity awarded to you simply because of who your father or mother is, and you could easily turn your back on me because you have an opportunity to make life more convenient for you, if that follows. So I can see what she's talking about, the feeling of being threatened.
I understand that you can sometimes receive messages that make you feel like you were outside or other, but I choose to look at it from a perspective of caring for Blackness as a whole and preserving it.
That's so eye-opening.
It reminds me of
thought
something that Muhammad Ali said. If I see a bunch of snakes coming my way, I close the door. I'm not trying to determine which one is safe for me.
Right.
And I think that oftentimes, and this is something that I've also said mostly to light-skinned people who are trying to come for me in my DMs, that I'm like, when people are asking what you are, it is a question of safety. Am I safe with you? Is it okay for me to be myself with you? Or are you going to be just another agent of white supremacy who cloaks themselves in such a way that I would accept you and then you would pull the rug from under me, right? So like how some folk would talk about like these white people who like, oh yeah, I'm down for the cause. Until it gets too hot and then they die. Right. Question that dark-skinned somebodies are having for light-skinned and mixed-race somebodies because we're like, well, we have no idea where you stand on half the stuff. And if I stand with you, I might get hurt. So I'm asking, what are you for my safety? And I'm sorry that my safety question bothers you, but I still have to ask it.
But that makes me beg the question that we can't necessarily put biracial folks in the same folks as white people who claim to be allies, because biracial folks didn't choose to be that. So I would imagine that there would be less examples of a biracial person turning on Black people than a white person turning on Black people.
You would think so.
I would. That's why I'm saying I would think so. I'm not sure, but that's an interesting thought to me. That I guess my question is, in what ways would a biracial person betray Black people in using their privilege? Like how would that look?
That's a great question.
I like this conversation so far, though. I like the conversation.
Do you want to take a stab at that?
Go ahead. I've already spoken, so go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Tiffany.
I was going to say, if you know any history about the Haitian Revolution of 1804, right? Haitians were able to accomplish that because they had to get rid of what they called the collaborators, right? And a lot of the collaborators, unfortunately, were lighter-skinned Black people who were the children of the slave masters. And so a lot of those collaborators would kind of parade around as allies and get the inside information and then feed it to the slave masters. And a lot of the revolutions that would have happened sooner didn't happen because the collaborators. So they actually were either killing or actually had to poison not only the collaborators but also the slave masters. And that's how they were able to accomplish the Haitian Revolution. So I think that you're absolutely right in asking the question about safety. Like, me as a darker skinned woman, even though I have a mixed race child, I still have to ask questions and I have to kind of get clarity about where you stand, because I'm not sure if my safety is at stake or if you'll turn on me, because historically they've had this what I call light privilege. You might not have white privilege, but you do have light privilege. And so you're able to get into certain spaces that people like me or people of my melanin type are not allowed into or are treated differently when we arrive there. So I do think it is I think there's some empathy that needs to happen on both sides. And it's not to, take people who are lighter skinned saying all of you are racist or all of you have a privilege, but we have to acknowledge that our safety is at stake.
But I don't think that's a burden that just, because I noticed like with the whole like, are you my enemy or my friend thing, a lot of times light-skinned people have to carry that burden.
Yeah. Because
they're the ones that initially you go to like, okay, now I can see that there's something else going on here. But if we're gonna do this whole like, we need to question everybody, see who's our enemy, see who's our friend. It needs to be across the board, because I knew a lot of people who were my complexion and darker who had a white parent and a black parent. And they just happened to come out darker, and they did not really identify. They always tried to disconnect themselves from the black experience. So those are actually the worst kinds of enemies, because they're wearing the same skin as you and walking around.
So, did you only point to her example? I understand you made a reference in particular of someone who came out looking darker, but their melanin isn't just an example of being biracial.
Right, you're not even questioning what's happening.
Oh, yeah.
So I just think if we're gonna do it, we need to do it across the board and not just pick out lighter skinned individuals and be like, well, we need to figure out if you're a friend or foe. At this point, all of y'all are my foes until I figure out you're my friend. Which y'all are my friends.
But it's like the 20% stat that came up earlier. How many mixed race children are really mixed race? How many now that appear to be darker than people with two black parents? Same thing that you can have two dark skinned parents that come out with lighter skin. I mean,
interesting perspective, Juice, because I was going to say before, I know you wanted to jump in. Okay. I saw you like, but it is an interesting thing to think about, because, you know, at the end of the day, for me, like growing up in the 90s, like I said before, and some of us were talking about Mariah Carey before, like you couldn't tell me Mariah Carey wasn't black. Like she is black. I will punch her in your face. Don't nobody care what you said. That's Mariah Carey. I love her.
Because that's your representation.
And I think that I actually do believe that in general, black people have a very positive disposition towards people who are biracial. I don't think that it's overwhelmingly so. In my experience, I am not biracial. But I do think the conversation now, what I'm hearing is that oftentimes you have to choose. And we touched on that before. You were describing, Alex, that your choice was taken kind of like away from you. A lot of people put you into, you know, whatever category that suits them. But I have a question about the choice. Because for you, Shavon, who like have described, like I am very, very well aware that people who are darker skinned have been subjected to certain things, so they have to ask, they have to be skeptical. In knowing that as a biracial person, the legacy of whiteness, right? And the legacy of blackness and how extremely like opposite they seem. How do you feel being in a biracial body, having to make choices for yourself in knowing, you know, like the history of your ancestors on both sides? Does that bring you any sense of conflict? Do you feel like you have to make a choice? Do you consider yourself black? Do you embrace your white side?
Yes, I would consider myself a black biracial woman, and that's because my mother is actually half white. I am a quarter white, technically, even though I look like I am half white. Most people think that I am either mixed Puerto Rican, Dominican, especially when I came to New York. Like, there was lots of confusion as to who I was, but I would consider myself black, culturally black. My family is black. My mother is the only one who is half white. And I would say that when I was younger, I think that I had more confusion than I do now, kind of similar to how you were saying, Juice. And I would say that when I was younger, I felt that
39% of adults with a mixed racial background say they consider themselves to be multiracial. 61% don't consider themselves to be multiracial because they look like they were raised by one race, never knew the family member or ancestor that was a different race, and identify with a single race. Cool. So
perhaps maybe we put ourselves in too rigid of a framework that defined blackness, that told us how we could act and what to like. But now that I'm older,
that's 2015, so I can only imagine.
I find that this logic is shallow, because I believe defining blackness for ourselves is, again, paramount to our survival, because it protects us from specific biracial people, whether it's because they are light-skinned and can pass, or because they have a specific proximity to whiteness that has allowed them to erase their blackness in some ways. Gatekeeping, a certain amount of gatekeeping allows us to prevent those types of biracial people from coming in and reaping the rewards from the black community without coming to its defense or claiming it even. And the last thing that I'll say, if you will endure me talking about Meghan Markle for a second, is that I think that it's obviously very complicated talking about her. I empathize deeply with her racist plight with the media, and that's exactly what it is. It is racism that she's experiencing. But I have a problem with someone who cannot call themselves black but is nursed and nurtured by a Black woman, is given safe haven by a Black man, has her reputation publicly protected against the likes of Pierce Brosnan on national television by a Black woman activist.
Yeah.
You have all of these, you have this whole entire Black community coming after you, but you cannot call yourself Black or honor your mother and her mother before her by calling yourself Black, even calling the community that welcomed you Black after you realized you were Black close to 40.
Ago?
Yeah. And now you have them retracting the racism claims against the royal family, and I feel like that's just a slap in the face of any Black person who's helped them. And two, the last thing that I will say about that is she also serves as a representative of someone who could potentially bring harm to the Black community by upholding white institutions and standards. Harry said something very disturbing to me on I think it was the Oprah. It was the Oprah. It was the Oprah interview where he said the institution missed out on an incredible opportunity with my wife. So disturbing because the opportunity there was to wield Meghan's Blackness as this
As a
double
sign of
agent.
progress.
Yeah, as this double agent in their racist promenade around Africa. To connect with the Commonwealth, but really what you're doing is padding Africa's legitimacy in Africa. You're padding the UK's legitimacy in Africa, and you are also glorifying and softening the racist transgressions and the current rape of resources that are happening now. So that's present harm to the Black global community that your representation is having. And you have to care about that. If you're going to accept help from us, you have to care about that.
And tokenizing her.
Yeah.
So well
That
was fire.
I think
I like that you were going to come with it.
Thank you for that.
I think with Meghan,
Go
both
ahead,
her, I think with Meghan, like both her parents failed her in that regard. I think that they thought like she can pass, and they never.
Man, they've been cooking. I'm sorry, I couldn't say that because they've been cooking. And this is why I argue that. I just, like, especially, like, that ties into, like, how the first woman addressed that you're kind of looking out for your own safety because it is, you can easily flip the script and identify because it's convenient for you to push some type of agenda. It's easy for you to navigate to that realm for some type of PR benefit. But when it's time for you, let me slide back to where I'm comfortable. And I don't know what y'all got going on over there, kind of thing.
Imagine she would be on this type of scale where it would be questioned, and now she's kind of paying the price of that. But I mean, her mother says in the documentary, like, "Oh, I didn't teach her," and it's kind
It was
of
very
like,
strange to me.
Yeah, it's kind of like it was very much the white mother type of situation, which was very odd. Well, I'm not the biracial. I'm Dominican, the original biracials in the Western Hemisphere, because that's where Columbus landed first. And so race is very present. I will say that I'm more comfortable in Black spaces. Like, as far as like, there's this wall that comes up when I'm in a space where like I'm the only ethnic person and it's just like all white people, that if I'm in a room full of like all Black people, maybe I'll get a little shy, but I'm not gonna get, like, I don't feel this wall come up that I feel, and so I guess they kind of choose for me. Like, the white people choose for me.
And
you're other.
Yeah, and in our culture, in Caribbean culture that's Spanish speaking, it would be mestizo. I literally just on Instagram the other day got called mestizo, and I've never said anything about my race or my parents or whoever they are. So in different cultures, it's also very different because in the States, there's this very, there's an idea around race and how it's structured, and everyone kind of falls into that. Versus in Latin American countries where colonization was like the most prevalent, that's where it kind of started. The identity shifts a little bit. It's actually people who are light-skinned are very proud to be light-skinned because they are mestizo, or what is considered to be mestizo. And that makes the Black community feel erased because then it's like, oh, well, we can definitely tell you're anti-Black and then we want nothing to do with you, or we want to embrace that more by marrying a light-skinned person. So the dynamics culturally and, depending on the environment that you're raised in can also shift identity as well. Does anybody here
So
have
glad you
friends
said
who
that.
are like culturally of a different country who have a different perspective?
I'm
or
so glad you said that.
Yeah.
Biracial people are called coolie in Jamaica. Donovan, you can attest to this.
That's
and it's
true,
it's a
Nikki.
very nasty term.
Right.
It's a derogatory term. And so I find, to your point, it's almost like I see biraciality being more accepted in America than the islands, where it is very divisive and it's very, oh, they think they're better.
Right.
And then there's kind of a two-way hate that happens.
Yeah.
And so I love that you brought that up, because it is, I think, probably similar in Dominican culture, Puerto Rico, like there is
Yeah.
a weird, I wonder though, even in a country like Puerto Rico or in the Dominican Republic, isn't there something within the country? Like I would imagine dark-skinned Dominicans, light-skinned Dominicans, are you more black, are you more white? What's the nuance then within a culture where people are mixed up? That's what I wonder. Because in the States, it's like there's black people, white people, and biracial. But what happens when you're in a country where everyone's a little mixed up? How does that layer change?
That's a really great question.
They have
That's what you really
they have the most extensive names for what you are.
Like a long.
There's a long, beautiful list to determine exactly where you are. So you can be mestizo, or you can be mulatto, or you can be like they have named you. Where we have tried to oversimplify it, I guess, in a sense, in the United States, to be like, well, number one, because we have white people very present here, so it's like, you're not white, so then you must be the other. And then the determination is because white
Mulatto. Quadrant.
white has been set as being the go-to, the top of the food chain, like everybody should want proximity to that. It means that simultaneously you don't want proximity to blackness, which means that we're literally trying to jockey for position to get away from being considered black, knowing that you will never be considered white. So the way that I see it in my black ass dark skin, as someone who also studies colorism, texturism, and sexuality, is that there's this beautiful dichotomy. You're watching it sort of play out, and it's actually very similar to what's going on over there, in the sense that the one drop rule here means one drop black, you're black. Whereas the one drop rule in other places mean one drop other, you're other. You get to now say you're not black, because you are actually claiming that one drop of other that you have, and you're claiming it hard because it comes with literal, actual privileges.
Yes.
So like they talk about, like in Biracial, that you can literally tell who has money by their skin tone. You can literally look at them and say, you have money, oh, you're poor. Here in the States, we like to believe that you can't tell that here, except that you
can.
can. Because we also have a color caste system.
Yes.
We just don't want to acknowledge the color caste system, especially because racism seems to be our primary modicum of saying fuck you to all kinds of people. So it ends up getting sort of lost in the sauce that we are still operating in a color caste system, because we already know that like on the first, there was an episode where I talked a little bit about COVID and black asses, and people didn't seem to understand. So I want to explain that one piece real quick. And that is that I said that black people, dark-skinned black people, were dying at an unprecedented rate from COVID, and people did not connect it to colorism. And it's connected to colorism because you can't tell the oxygen levels in somebody as dark as us. It does not accurately read, which means that hospitals were sending people home who could not breathe well because they're like, well, it says you're oxygenated. That's where colorism comes in. It's literally coming in down to the science, Gucci down to the socks. But then people want to say that all of us, as long as you have a drop of black, everybody's black. And I'm just like, well, I don't know that I agree with that. I think that you can identify personally however you would like to, which includes Rachel Dolezal. She can She can say she is whatever she wants to in here.
But
because you get to identify for yourself, and who has the right to fight you on what you identify as for yourself? Nobody. But when it comes to social identification, that is something very different. Because while it may be chosen for you on occasion, it's also chosen for me 100% of the time.
It's not on occasion. It's a lot.
Yeah. 100%. Has anybody ever seen the movie from 1959? It's one of my favorite movies called The Imitation of Life.
Yes.
I watched that. I remember as a young child. I'm probably gonna have my son watch it soon as well. But it was about a young girl whose mother was, black, like dark skin like me. The mother was black, the father was white, but she could pass for white. And the whole premise of the movie is that she really struggled with her identity and trying to separate herself from blackness as far as possible. Like so much so she would deny her mom when her mom would try and drop off her lunchbox at school, or when she got beat up in the alleyway once the guy that she was dating found out that her mother was black and she got beat to a pulp. And her mom, apologized, said, I loved you too much, and her mom dies, right? And she, the end of the movie, she's coming in and she's like falling all over the casket, but you denied your own heritage because you wanted to be accepted so badly by white people. And the problem with that is, even in the Latino, I speak Spanish, so I'm like a little bit closer to the Latin culture, but there's the ablancamiento, which was this whole movement for in different parts of Latin America where they try to lighten the race to make sure, that's why a lot
on purpose.
Yeah, on purpose. They would literally tell people, listen, go marry somebody lighter or a darker skinned person like me, go marry somebody lighter so you have lighter children, and then their generation would, and then just kept continuing.
Argentina did that.
Which is interesting because when I lived in Spain, right, Spaniards look down at Latinos like, y'all are mixed. Y'all are mixed race. They don't accept you. Like they're like, and so
we don't want to claim them either.
They don't want to claim, but a lot of people who are closer in even the Latin community that are more lighter skinned, they're claiming their Spaniard or their Portuguese heritage, but those people are denying you. And I'm like, tú sabes eso? Are you paying attention? Because you're claiming them, and they're like literally disavowing you. And so
that's the gotcha with it. It's because everybody is fighting for privilege for people who ultimately will never relinquish that privilege.
Never have it.
I do want to come back to you, Flora. I have a question because I know you had mentioned that some of your siblings are darker, right? I don't know if you have that same experience as Sam or anyone else. Did your parents have very specific conversations with y'all when you were younger about these differences and what they can mean in society and the larger conversation about race? Did they ever talk about it?
Absolutely not. It was more negative commentary all the time, literally to the two darker siblings. Like detrimental trauma, terrible stuff. Rather than the other way around. Rather than teaching you society might treat you a little different, you're darker than your siblings, et cetera, et cetera. No, it was the other way around. And ironically, it came from the darker parent. From who they got their blackness is where the hurt came from.
Yes,
So,
exactly
What
Tiffany was saying.
My mom had that same experience. My mom is like my complexion. Her brother is like very, very, really, really light. And so she always told me about, like, just telling her stories, complaining about life. She always tells me about like how people used to treat her brother really, really, really well, really nice. And her, they treated like shit. Like she would talk about sometimes like the Christmas gift she would get would be like oversized dresses, where he would get like gold chains, and people would tell him how beautiful he is and he's meant to be something, this is that, and they would always speak down to her. And she like, it was her whole life like that. And luckily she just always like kind of knew who she was, so it didn't like really affect her self-esteem. But she was like, if I had been a weaker person, it would have messed up my self-esteem because they treated him like he was this gold standard, but we were literally the same. Like we were from the same mother, from the same father. He just happened to be lighter.
Can I comment on that? I think that maybe it probably happens like in the American and other parts of the Caribbean, but I think with Dominicans specifically, I can think off the top of my head of 3 families where daughters specifically came out dark-skinned and are here in the U.S. Where they're going to face racism, right? And they're not being taught anything anything about their blackness, anything about loving it, anything. And I kid you not, I'm 100% convinced that I see them all have mental illness, deep depression.
Oh my gosh.
And it's like, well, duh.
Yes, absolutely.
Because,
I will never forget a long time I had a conversation on the grapevine with a woman, she's Nigerian. And I will never forget, she said as a result of the colorism that she faced in her life, it led to mental illness where she was just in a constant state of paranoia. And it manifested itself as bipolar disorder, it manifested itself as schizophrenia as well. And I just remember sitting across from her and just being like, how horrible is it that you can have a child come from you and then shame that child for being like you? And that's how much of a mind fuck racism and colorism and white supremacy is. And also just to go back to this idea of how like Black folks can participate in this, in places like Maryland, in the DC area, for example, where a lot of wealthy biracial Black folks went to, right? We were talking about after the Great Migration, people are like, we have to get out of here, we need to get away from the South. And the idea was, in these areas, was to marry consistently and partner consistently with other very, very light folks. This is a part of the legacy of even the Jack and Jills that Black people love to talk about, is these very exceptional Black people who look, sound, act, dress a certain kind of way. And yes, it exists in the Caribbean and other places as well, but one thing that we cannot run away from is that it's always going to be that lighter than thing that we're talking about here. So Juice, you may experience certain privileges, and other places you may experience more because you're a little bit lighter. The same thing for you, Sam. So the same question for you, also like having a Black parent and having a Puerto Rican parent identifying as Puerto Rican. I don't know what that means racially for your parent who identifies as Puerto Rican, but did you ever have those conversations with your parents as well about what it means to be Black as well and what the impacts of that would be?
Well, I wasn't raised by my father, who's Black. So I was being raised by a Puerto Rican woman in a Black community. So a lot of my education was coming from school, from teachers, from people who took me under their wing, like my friend's fathers, my friend's mother, like is where I found like a balance, because at home it wasn't balanced. It was Puerto Rican. My siblings on my mom's side are all Puerto Rican. My siblings on my father's side are all Black. I was the only mixed one. So there weren't conversations about what my experience was like. There wasn't a conversation about what my Latinness was supposed to be like, or my Blackness was supposed to be like. It was, you'll find your own way. There wasn't really conversations about it. I just knew that I was the darkest of the Puerto Ricans and the lightest of the Black.
That is great. Right? It's so great. That's a part of why we wanted to have the conversation.
Yeah.
Because I feel like this is just Donovan. I am not projecting on anyone else, but I do think that there is so much room to have conversations, to learn, to dismantle these binaries, where we can hear from people about their experiences of being multiracial or biracial or multicultural. Why